Okay, it's Sunday, which means against my better judgment, it's time to go to Reddit and see what we can find in this hive of scum and villainy. So I've been to the Overwatch University subreddit ahead of time, just scraped all the questions off the first couple pages. I'm going to answer them now with some footage of Overwatch plays in the background. I played these games on stream earlier today, so there you go. So, first up is, what sort of changes, and this is from Discord actually, what sort of changes would you like to see in a theoretical Bastion rework? Real straightforward, lower his damage across the board, except for recon form, leaves recon form exactly as it is right now. Reduce all other forms damage, I don't know by how much, just an amount, change his category to tank, give him his shield back from beta, make it bigger, probably like, not quite as big as Orissa's shield, but you know, just under that, and change him to tank. That's what I'd do. I would also change his heal so that instead of it being this like delicate little operation where he like welds himself and heals over time, instead it's just like ramshackle, just like slap a fucking plate on there and it's a burst heal for like 200 instead of the overtime effect, and it has a pretty long cooldown. Basically I would rework him to be a more threatening version of Orisa that has much less utility than Orisa does. Because Orisa has some fantastic utility, and she's moderately threatening. I would go the opposite route, where the Bastion tank would be threatening, but very lacking in utility. And would probably serve as, like, mostly being an off-tank rather than a main tank, because he'd still be, like, fairly immobile, obviously. Also increases health, you know, that would probably go without saying if we're going to move into the tank category, but increases health. Probably to 500, maybe just 400. I don't know. I don't know the exact breakdown I'd do on this. So the recon, just leave it as it is. And the turret damage, I would reduce it just so that it's more than Orisa, but less than it is right now. And then tank form, I might leave the tank damage as it is. If I was to reduce the tank form damage, I would give it an additional effect. Like, I would cut, like, the damage on the tank shots in half or something, but I would increase the number of shots, increase the time he spends in the form, and add, like, a slowing effect, maybe, to the shells as well. So that if you just, like, got winged by it, you were still slowed, you know. Maybe something like that. But I'd basically rework him into being a tank. That's what I'd do. I don't know about how much I adjust all of these damage changes, like, you know, an amount, you know, we'll figure it out. That's what playtesting's for. We'd figure it out, brother. But that's what I'd do. I just feel like Bastion, as he currently is, he's essentially impossible to imbalance in his current iteration in, Overwatch. Because I feel like he is always going to be way too strong, or just way too weak. I don't think it's... you know, there was evidence of this fact when they buffed him initially with the Ironclad, and everyone was like, alright, that's way too fucking much! That's way too fucking much! And we reduced it back down again, and it was much more reasonable after that point. By which I mean Bastion stopped being played again. So, you know, that was a fun, like, 3-day period that was happening for. Great time if you're a Bastion player. Yeah, I just think, like, him and Doomfist, I have earmarked as being the two that in their current iteration of their kits are impossible to properly balance. I feel like they both require some kind of rework. So yeah, that's what I'd do for Bastion. So next up is, do you have any predictions for what Overwatch 2 will have as far as champion releases go? It's, like, impossible to tell with Overwatch, dude, because it feels like every character that they, like, foreshadow the arrival of ends up, like, not actually appearing, with the exception of Doomfist. You know, like, we knew Doomfist was coming pretty ahead of time. Sombra as well, we knew was coming for a fucking long time. Before they, like, if you were there when, like, the Sombra thing was starting up, it felt like it took years for Sombra to actually come out. But regardless, it seems like all the ones that get foreshadowed don't actually end up turning up any time in the near future, at the very least. I feel like there are some characters that are an inevitability of time. It's just sooner or later they're gonna have to get added to the game because they're too, like, distinct to not get added to the game at some point. Like, Junker Queen has to show up at some point. Like, there's no way Junker Queen never shows up in the game, as far as I'm concerned. The evil Omnic we've seen as well. I don't remember his name. But, like, it feels like he's gonna has to show up sometime sooner or later. They're just too distinct. They're too unique to not actually show up at some point in time. But, like, outside of them, fuck, I don't know, dude. Everybody we theorize on never actually ends up turning up. I think they also confirmed that Sojourn is going to be a DPS, so we'll get to go through that round of people being upset again in the near future. The DPS category will always be larger than the other two categories combined. I'm sorry to tell you this. That will always be the way of things. And to be honest with you, fine. I don't care. I don't care if there's less tanks and less healers, because do you know what matters to me, really? Is if all of the tanks and healers are unique and distinct from each other. Which you cannot say about every DPS in the DPS tree. You cannot say that they are all distinct from each other, because all of, like, there are ones that have fairly big overlap with each other. Ashe and Widow, they're not the same, obviously, but there's pretty big overlap between those two heroes. The tanks and healers, I would say there is close to zero overlap between all of the heroes in the tanks and healers categories. And that's what's more important to me, rather than the actual number of characters in there. Now, oh, Jesus Christ, frame rate. Now, you can definitely make the case that, well, just because they're all distinct from each other doesn't mean you can play all of them, which I would agree. There's a problem right now where the heroes are badly balanced relative to each other, which means that, yeah, there's not as many tanks, and there's also less viable tanks as well, because several of them are poorly balanced. You know, nice 3D hook. You know, that's an issue. But the issue to me is not, like, the number of people in the categories. It's how distinct they are from each other. I think the tank and healer categories, as far as being distinctive and unique from each other, they're killing it. They're just not necessarily well balanced. Sigma and Orisa are probably the two that have, like, the biggest overlap with each other, and they're, like, still really different from each other. You can make cases for, like, Winston and them as well, but, you know. Like Winston and D.Va compared to each other, but whatever, you know. Anyway, that was a big tangent right there. So yeah, I think like Junker Queen and like the evil Omnic are inevitable, but outside of that, I don't really have any predictions for specific people. Is there like an archetype that isn't really in right now that they could do? The thing is, Overwatch, like the way the Overwatch community is, it makes it kind of hard. This is going to be the worst duel you've ever seen in your life, by the way. The way the Overwatch community is makes it really hard to, like, put certain archetypes for characters in there. Because, like, people complain about so much, particularly crowd control. So you can't really do, like, disruptor archetypes comfortably with the Overwatch community because they'll throw a shit fit. So we can't really get, like, because I feel like disruptor as an archetype is not properly explored as far as Overwatch goes. But you also, like, the most firm disruptor they ever added to the game was Bridget, and we saw how well that went. So I don't feel like they'll try that one again anytime soon. Would I like there to be another stealth hero? I might like there to be another stealth hero. I don't really feel like Sombra really encapsulates, like, stealth to me as an archetype. I think I might prefer them to try that one again. Because to me, Sombra at this point is more of soldier with more utility, rather than being like a stealthy hacker as far as an archetype goes. But that might just be me, you know, it's a fairly subjective opinion. But I think I would like them to try Stealth Champion again. The problem with that is that Stealth Champions also have a big tendency to be extraordinarily unbalanced. It tends to be an issue with the archetype. You see this across many games. I think I might like to see somebody that does more to affect vision lines, which is fairly, like, you know, unspecific as far as it goes. Like, you know, in like Valorant, there's that one character. Jesus Christ, the frame rate is absolutely abhorrent, isn't it? Holy shit. And I don't know why. I have no idea why. What if we just, like, close Chrome? That might help. Chrome's a big boy. Like, you know, there's that one guy in Valorant that, like, just drops, like, the giant fucking fire smokes. Well, there's a few people that do the smoke screens, and then, like, the giant walls of fire that just, like, obscure vision. I would like to see something like that in Overwatch. Somebody that has ways to obstruct sight lines without physically obstructing them, right? Like, Reinhardt obstructs sight lines, but not in, but, like, in way of physically being there, not just, like, visually fucking with you. So I would like to see something like that, and I feel like that's something that's fairly likely to turn up sooner or later as well. But yeah, outside of Junker Queen and the Evil Omnic, I don't really have any, like, firm predictions, no, because, fuck, dude. Like, characters in the lore, you know, they'll, like, if they're a distinct character, they'll almost certainly arrive at some point in some iteration. Like, I still think Effie is going to show up at some point, just not physically there in the field, obviously. I think she'll be, like, piloting a robot or something from back in base, you know. Like, they'd never physically put Effie in there as a fighter, but I could see her like, piloting some kind of robot, remotely. Anyway, so yeah, like, those are the ones I got. So then the last question from the Overwatch is, do you think that a support who doesn't have any healing whatsoever could work? People often point to Sim being so stationary as the reason for why she was so bad before becoming a DPS, but I think that it might be also just because a support with no healing is inherently bad in this game. I think with role queue it's impossible. I don't think it's possible with role queue to put in a support that doesn't do healing, because them picking that character will be so restrictive to the rest of the team composition, right? Like, it would be unless they have, like, fucking ungodly levels of utility attached to them, like, they would need to be just disgustingly strong in terms of utility to justify sacrificing a healer. Just because of the way this game is. I think with role queue, it's impossible. I think without role queue, you could do it, but with role queue, there's no way. Yeah, like, they would need to be so strong to justify sacrificing a support. And, like, just think about how they'd get played in, like, the broader context of Overwatch, right? Where, like, so one guy picks Zenyatta, but the other guy mains this support that doesn't heal. Well, he's gonna pick that guy, isn't he? And, you know, oh, well, that guy mains Zenyatta, so he's not gonna play. Oh, so we just have to play without any healers this game. Oh, that's nice. That's very sick. So no, with role queue, I think it's definitely not possible. I don't think the design of the game inherently makes it impossible to do, because a commonly cited reason is just the amount of damage that is done in this game, which is, of course, extraordinarily high. Which I think you make a case for that, but I also don't think that that gets you by alone on this argument. 'Cause, like, yeah, damage happens real fast in this game, but, like, people like Moira and Baptiste and Anna, like, they're really strong healers. They can get people through a lot of shit. So I think as long as the, non-healing support had sufficient utility to justify it, I think you could do it in this game. I think you could do it, but definitely not with role queue. I don't know what this hypothetical non-healing support would look like, other than not Symmetra. You know, like, the easiest way to do this would be to give them some other way to augment people's health other than healing. Like, if you put, like, Torbjorn's armor pack on them, or something like that, you know? But to me, at that point, they've become a healer again. Like, if you start affecting another person's health pool in any way, you are a healer, as far as I am concerned. So, I don't know what this non-healing support would look like. Maybe they do shit like fucking with sightlines, and they just have, like, a damage boost in there somewhere, you know, or some kind of, like, damage reduction, maybe, We were talking about this on stream. I think this idea would be better for a tank in hindsight, but like we were talking about somebody who has like an AoE damage reduction around them. And then their their like main ability is that they have a charge that works sort of like Reinhardt, sort of like somewhere between Reinhardt and Hammond just bowling through you, where they do physically charge through you, but rather than pinning anybody, they just like do damage and then like push everybody to the side from where they go in. So kind of like a line breaker, where they're up there with the front line, like bashing people. They've got the damage reduction on themselves and their allies, and then they charge in. They don't really do much damage, but they just, like, push everybody to the side to break the line and scatter them. I think that maybe something like that would be better as, like, a tank, but, you know, like, this is the kind of, sort of, style of utility I would like to see more of in Overwatch, because as far as utility goes in Overwatch, you don't exactly get a broad variety of it. You get, I heal you, I damage boost you. And that's kind of it, you know? You get a couple crowd controls, which will inevitably be nerfed before too long, because Overwatch community is baby. And that's kind of it. I would like to see more unique styles of utility added to this game, other than, oh, he has a damage boost. They do seem to be trending more this way, as well, for what it's worth, because, like Baptiste, Immortality Field is a pretty unique form of utility. It broadly still falls under keeping you alive, but I don't think anybody can deny the lamp is a very unique form of utility, as well as his knees, for that matter. And Sigma has pretty unique utility in the form of his ultimate, which is a very unique form of crowd control. It is still just crowd control, of course, but the way he does the crowd control is very different to all other forms of crowd control. So I do think they seem to be trending more this way of having unique forms of utility attached to characters, but we'll see if that continues to be the case. It does tend to be the way with this sort of game, where as time goes by, the characters that get added to the game over time just become weirder and weirder. You know, this is already becoming the case in Overwatch with relatively few heroes added to the game. And if you look at a game like League of Legends, like you have, like you just compare, you've got like Ashe, who is just Frost Archer. That's her thing. Her arrows slow you. She fires a lot of arrows, and she has one big arrow that stuns you. And that's it. That's what she does. She does the Frosties and the big arrow. And she has a hawk she sends out that gives vision, and that's it. Very unique, very basic hero, you know. And now we have characters in there like Aurelion Sol, who is a giant fucking space dragon that has 3 planets orbiting him circularly at all points in time. And he can contract and expand that circle. When it is expanded, it of course does more damage, as of course when they're further away from him, they just do more damage. That's just how, you know, that's just how stars are. And then he's always, if you break line of sight to him, you still know where he is, because he's got 3 fucking stars floating around him, brother. You can see stars when he's hiding in a bush. You can see them floating around the bush. He's right there. He's got this this ability where he creates a galaxy, and he throws it across the map, and it keeps going as long as he keeps pace with it, and it gets bigger, and it gets bigger, and bigger, and bigger, and then it explodes and does damage on people when he triggers it. And then he does this big roar that pushes people back, and then he does a big dash that goes, like, fucking far. You know, we've come quite far from, Frost Archer, actually. We've come very far, in fact. We now have space dragons with control over stars, you know. We've come far. Overwatch will, of course, at some point get this way, I'm sure, as well, where we will be piloting one of the mechs, perhaps, in the background of this map, and we will get there and we will stomp on the small people like they are insects, and that will, of course, be extraordinarily balanced, because by this point, well, Sombra just completely shuts that hero down, as would be logical. Anyway, I forget what I was talking about. Oh yes, characters get more unique as time goes by. Yeah, so, no. Originally, this question was about healers. No, I don't think you can do a non-healing support in this game. I don't think it's feasible, at least with role queue. I think with open queue it could be feasible, but I don't see us returning to open queue anytime in the near future. So, effectively, it is impossible. So, that's it for Discord. Oh, Jesus Christ, that was 20 minutes on the 3 things from Discord. Holy shit. So, I'm not going to do all these questions I had picked out over here. So first off, why am I having trouble killing the heroes I counter as Reaper? So there's this thing with counters where you need to remember that just because you've picked a counter doesn't mean that you automatically shut down the character on the other side, right? There's still counterplay in here. There are very few hard counters in this game. I struggle to think of a matchup that I actually consider to be a hard counter, in fact. Because most people would say, like, Widow versus Pharah, that is not a hard counter, okay? That's a skill-based matchup. That is, at best, a soft counter because it's skill-based. A hard counter is, it requires no skill to do this. You pick this character in response to that character, and you have beaten that character. No questions asked. That's a hard counter. Like, it's basically skillless, right? Like, you can pick this character with essentially no knowledge of them and the matchup and still perform the counter. I can't really think of an Overwatch example of that really existing. Because people would say something like Reaper versus Winston as being a hard counter. While, yes, that is true, if Winston just starts fighting Reaper, he's going to lose. But that's not the only thing involved in a matchup, right? It's not just your raw, like, 1 versus them potential. Yeah, that's part of it, but, like, broadly speaking, can a Reaper always shut down Winston? No, it depends on what the Reaper and Winston are doing compared to each other, right? Because if you pick Reaper to counter Winston because he's jumping in your backline and killing them, if the Reaper does then not stick with his backline and just continues to go off flanking, he is not countering the Winston, because the Winston does not come into contact with the Reaper. Reaper is behind Winston's team right now, and Winston is behind Reaper's team. They're so far away from each other that the matchup doesn't even happen. So, like, you know, that's something to consider, is just because they're there doesn't mean they shut them down. You need to adapt your playstyle in a way to play around your counter, and the counters need to adapt a certain playstyle as well in most circumstances. Because another example that people will go to is Winston versus Genji. Yes, Winston versus Genji, well, Winston's pretty favored in that matchup, sure, 1v1. But I've seen so many games where Winston does fuck all to counter Genji. And do you know why that is? Because Genji is going into Winston's backline and killing them. And what's Winston doing right now? He's playing it like a dive tank. If you're picking Winston to counter Genji, you need to stay with your team. Because if you're changing to Winston, you were a tank. You were not being bullied by Genji in all likelihood. If you were, something very bad is happening to you. So you are changing to Winston because you're going, Genji is fucking up my team. Which means you need to stay with your team. But most Winston players do not do that. They go off and continue playing Winston in this generic fashion of diving into the enemy team, so they're not countering Genji. Because again, Winston's behind Genji's team, and Genji is behind Winston's team. So Genji is just still killing Winston's team. No counter has occurred. So, like, these are things you think about, right? Like, alright, well, Pharah versus Widow. You know, if the Pharah is better than the Widow, she clicks on the Pharah every time. Not so. Depends on the map, depends on your team, depends on a bunch of different things. There's still options for the Pharah player to engage in counterplay with the Widowmaker. This is map dependent for the most part. Certain maps Pharah is very restricted on in this regard, and certain maps Pharah has a lot of options comparatively. Generally, it depends on the number of alternate routes that Pharah has available to her. So a map like Volskaya, for instance, has a fair few different ways that Pharah can approach from, so that gives Pharah significantly more options in regards to Widow, because typically what Pharah does is just try and get to Widow. Anyway, so, you know, there's no hard counter in this game. They all require a certain playstyle. If you are having trouble killing your counters as Reaper, specifically, then the problem is probably that you are being too aggressive. You are not playing defensively enough, because the people that you change to Reaper to counter, usually you need to play defensively to do something about that, because it's usually like Winston, D.Va, maybe Roadhog. You know, these are the kinds of people you're usually countering with Reaper. So countering them specifically, like if you're going off, and this is also going to be a really bad duel, but I'm going to get her, don't you worry. If you're countering these people as Reaper, you're going to need to play somewhat defensively. You're going to need to stay with your team. If you go off flanking, you're not going to be in any kind of position to counter a Winston or a D.Va. So, you know, just bear this in mind, basically, when you're picking somebody to counter somebody else. You just think about, like, what it is realistically you're trying... I'm sorry, I punched the microphone. What it is you're reasonably trying to achieve with this selection, right? Like, are you changing to them because they're fucking you up specifically? In which case, just changing to the counter pretty much resolves that issue, right? If you were playing Widow and you're changing to Reaper because they had a Winston, that was probably specifically because Winston was fucking you up, right? So just changing is enough. But if you're changing because other people are being fucked up by the person that you're countering, you need to think, well, so then what do I need to do to stop that character from doing their job, right? Which, you know, if it's usually how defensive do I have to play versus how aggressive do I have to play, right? Because, let's be real, most of the times you're countering somebody, it's because it's like a flanker or a sniper, right? Those are usually the two things that prompt a counter pick. So it's like, if it's a sniper, you have to play really aggressively to get to the sniper, and if it's a flanker, you have to play defensively to stop the flanker from doing stuff. These are usually what's happening, but there's different things that can be happening. Because you might be changing, like, you might be playing Zarya, but you might change to, like, Orisa with the Reinhardt, because you've identified that their team is playing 2 DPS that are pretty low shield damage. So you've identified that you're not getting much value on Zarya, and you'd be better served by just picking another shield tank, because then you are shutting down their DPS because they can't really do significant shield damage, therefore making it a lot harder for them to win the fight. So something like that can happen, counter-pick-wise as well, but that's fairly nuanced compared to the usual reasons that you're changing to counterpick somebody. But that kind of thing does still happen. But, you know, we're usually talking snipers and flankers when we're talking about counterpicks. So, like, anyway, that's it for Reaper specifically. But anytime you're having trouble countering the heroes you're countering, just think about, like, what you need to be trying to achieve to stop them from achieving their goal, because this is what you're doing when you're countering them, right? You're trying to stop them from doing their job. So you need to identify what their job is, and then what can you do specifically on this hero that really shuts that down. You know, McCree. I'm playing McCree because they're picking a flanker. I have hard crowd control, right? That's it. So I'm trying to, and it's short range crowd control. So I'm trying to play really close to the people on my team that are vulnerable to characters like Genji, and then I'm going to use my hard crowd control to stop him and kill him. Or at the very least, scare him off, because he knows that if I am stood next to Ana, it is now much riskier for him to, like, go hard on the Ana. So you do that. You leverage your mere presence, and then crowd control on top of that to stop him from doing his job. You know, think about that kind of thing, basically. So there you go. So next up, how long have we been here? Oh, Jesus Christ, it's already been 30 minutes. So I guess we'll just do one more. Let me pick the best one. Which one is the best one? I'm gonna go with the fairly generic one, to be fair, and I'll just save the rest for next week, because I think these are all still good questions. Best heroes in each role right now. So we're gonna go top 3 every role. Tanks, I already talked about this like a week ago, where I think it's Rein, Zarya, and Orisa. I just think they're most versatile heroes, basically. A large portion of what makes a hero strong for me is how versatile they are, how many situations you can put them in where they are good, or at least just acceptable, you know, not terrible choices at the very least, you know. How many situations are they, broadly speaking, good in? So Rein, Zarya, and Orisa, I think they just fit in almost all circumstances. Zarya, obviously not all of them, because she's an off-tank, so you can't always pick Zarya. Because if the other tank picked Roadhog, well, I can't pick Zarya, you know. But Zarya is phenomenal. She's pretty much the best off-tank in most situations. If not the best, one of the best. And it's fairly niche that she's not the best. Rein, obviously, he's like he's the sledgehammer. He's the sledgehammer approach. If you don't know what tank is good, Rein's probably fine. Rein's probably fine, dog. And then Orisa, she's just very similar to Reinhardt, essentially. She's better in some circumstances compared to Reinhardt, which is typically related to high ground control or range issues, where Rein has trouble getting in. Certain circumstances, her shield uptime will also be better than Reinhardt's. This is not always true anymore, of course, since they nerfed her shield health, but she is, broadly speaking, very good. Yeah, so then DPS. DPS is a little harder. I do think Echo is very strong right now. I don't know that I would put her at the top, but I would definitely put her in the top 3. I think she's very good. She does a lot of damage. Her ult is extremely versatile. It can be used aggressively and defensively. Yeah, her ability, she just does a lot of damage. She is somewhat dependent on her team for support, but not to the same degree that Pharah is. Echo can get a lot of value just by being very spammy. So she doesn't necessarily need to be flying at people, really. Pharah, if you're in a position where you can't do stuff in the sky, you are significantly limited in your effectiveness as Pharah. Echo, I feel like you can play her on the ground and she's fine. You know, like, she is pretty much fine. She's obviously better if you can leverage her mobility, of course, obviously. But broadly speaking, I think you can play Echo on the ground, and she's not at a massive disadvantage, whereas Pharah is at a pretty beefy disadvantage from having to play on the ground. Yeah, so, and she just does a lot of damage. Echo, I do think Echo's really good right now. McCree, he's always really good. You know, he's still really good right now. And I don't know who I'd put as the third one. To be honest with you, I might say Ashe. She's also quite spammy. The caveat I would attach to Ashe is that she is quite difficult to play. I would actually say that she is the hardest hit scan hero to play, which might sound galling, and this is of course a very subjective opinion I'm about to leverage right here. I just think Ashe is the hardest hit scan hero to aim with, and I've noticed that she seems to be the one that most people are confused about when they start playing her. Like, people, you know, there's just something about aiming with Ashe that's weird compared to the other hit scan heroes, and I don't really know how to properly articulate this, you know? Like, if I'm playing Widow and I miss somebody, I'm like, oh yeah, I missed that guy, you know? Whereas with Ashe, I feel like I am actively being robbed sometimes. I'm like, I clicked on that guy as firmly as I could possibly have clicked on him, and he did not take damage. I don't understand. And, you know, part of this is obviously just going to be I'm bad, you know, doubtlessly. But I don't, like, when I'm playing Widow, I'm very conscious of the fact it's just I'm bad. Whereas Ashe, I feel like I'm being robbed by some force I don't fully understand. This is obviously a very subjective opinion, and you are free to disagree with me on this one. But I feel that Ashe is actually the hardest hit scan hero to play. It's just that Bob and Dynamite are very good to have in your back pocket, right? Like, Dynamite is the reason Bob charges so fast, and Bob is a pretty good ultimate, right? We've all thought to ourselves on multiple occasions, yo, Bob should be in the Overwatch League. You know, like, we've all thought that. Bob's the best player on my team, you know, better than me playing Ashe, doubtlessly. Yeah, but I think I would say Ashe. I think I would go McCree, Ashe, Echo as the 3 best heroes. Not necessarily in that order, but I think those are the 3 I would put in there. And then healers, Ana, doubtlessly right now, is the best healer in the game. This is true at multiple points in time. Bio Grenade is just so strong, dude. Bio Grenade is just so strong by itself. Like, if Ana had none of her other utility attached to her, I think just off Bio Grenade, she'd still always be really strong. And then everything else she has... Ooh, fucking Reinhardt. Ooh, what a champion. Even if she just had Bio Grenade, that'd be good enough. But then obviously Ana has other things going for her. She obviously also has Sleep Dart. Nano Boost is really good for multiple reasons. Also a very good offensive and defensive ultimate, very versatile. Sets up multiple win conditions. You know, so Ana's got more going for her than just Bio Grenade, which is nice, but I think if she just had Bio Grenade, that'd be good enough. It's that strong. Bio Grenade is a disgustingly powerful ability. Yeah, so Ana, doubtlessly. It gets a little harder after that. Probably Lucio. You know, we definitely got to include one off healer, right? Most of the time you're going to be playing with one main healer and one off healer. Yeah, it's got to be Lucio as far as the off healers go. Zen just doesn't compare in terms of raw usefulness to Lucio. Mostly, like, not even through any fault of Zenyatta, just through the fault of, like, the game at large, where Zen is just very vulnerable to a lot of things that are present in this game. Lucio is not vulnerable to those same things. And when we're talking about off healers, like, one of the things you always have to consider is the defensive ultimate, right? Like, it's a very big aspect of them. Not the only aspect, but certainly a very big one. To me, definitely. The defensive ultimate is very strong. Certain circumstances, if you don't have defensive ultimate, you lost. I'm sorry. I'm sorry, you lost. There's nothing you can do. And, like, Zen and Lucio, they've got the two best defensive ultimates, the only real defensive ultimates in the game. And when you compare the two of them, Lucio is just a better hero than Zenyatta is. And it's not Zenyatta's fault. Zenyatta's been done dirty, okay? Zenyatta's been done dirty. It's not Zen's fault that he's this way. It's Overwatch's fault that Zenyatta is this way. And I'm very sorry for all of the people that like Zenyatta. Zenyatta's a very popular hero. You know, and that sucks. A lot of people like him. He's a very unique character, doubtlessly. Before Overwatch came out, he was the character I was most interested in by far. Right? Fucking Buddhist monk robot, right? Like, Jesus Christ, that's a fucking strong character archetype right there. Very unique design, extraordinary. I think he's a very iconic character as far as Overwatch goes. So it's unfortunate that he's in this position. And I think that helping Zenyatta should be the top of everyone's concerns, because I think Zenyatta is one of the best things in Overwatch as far as characters go. Is he my favorite character? No. Because I'm thirsty, and I cannot be thirsty for Zenyatta, okay? Who do I like? I like Sombra, alright? Because I'm a disgusting degenerate. But Zenyatta, I think he's one of the strongest, like, characters, lore-wise, concept-wise, in the game. And it's very unfortunate that he's in this position. So anyway, we weren't talking about Zenyatta, but every time I start talking about supports, invariably it comes towards Zenyatta at some point. These two topics just always converge. So yeah, Ana, Lucio, and then third, I feel like you could pick so many people from support right now to be the third best one. I feel like the support tree right now is as balanced as it's ever been. Like, I feel like they're all pretty close to each other, to be honest with you. With the exception of Ana. I think she stands very firmly above everybody else. But outside of that, I think everybody else is pretty close, really. Basically, we've got one that's really above, and one that's really below. I think everybody else is pretty close together, really. I'd probably say Baptiste, if I had to pick, but I do think that this is an extraordinarily minor difference between them all, right? Like, if I was to do this in tier list format, we'd have Ana in S, and then we'd have Lucio in A, and then we'd have, like, everybody else pretty much in B, and then I'd probably put Bridget and Zenyatta in C. And you might be surprised to hear I'd put Bridget down there, if you know me. I think Bridget is fairly unique. She's quite niche as far as picks go. I feel like in certain circumstances, Bridget is very strong. But outside of that, she's just kind of okay. So I'd put her in C, and then Zen, well-documented issue. But I feel like everybody else is, like, in the same tier as everybody else, really. Yeah, there you go. 3 best heroes in the role right now. Obviously very subjective. I know a lot of people would not put Orisa in the top 3 tanks, really. People would probably, on average, more people would probably say Sigma or Hammond. But I would say Orisa. But this is, of course, very subjective. I think DPS you would get a lot of dissenting opinions on. There's so many. There's so many DPS. You know, there are certain ones that are obviously bad. Without naming any names, but we all know who we're thinking about right now. But like, you know, there's a lot of DPS dudes, and then you have to, and then like, you know, what you decide is like your criteria for a tier list will of course vary from person to person. Whatever. Enough fucking grandstanding about this topic. We've been here for 40 minutes and I answered 4 questions. That's an absolutely unparalleled amount of waffle. I think that's 5 questions, wasn't it? I believe that I have broken my record, though, because we spent close to 30 minutes on 3 questions, you know. So that's great. Unparalleled amount of waffle right there. Anyway, thank you very much for watching. If you did, if you have any questions, feel free to ask. More than happy to answer. If you have a question you're dying to know the answer to, please join our Discord. We have a channel set up specifically for the questions. It doesn't have to be about Overwatch. It can be about whatever you want, but, you know... It's pretty much what we get asked, but, you know, it doesn't have to be Overwatch. I start streaming Twitch Thursday, Saturday, Sunday, 8 p.m. EST to 11 EST. There's a link to the channel in the description. If you managed to make it all work through the video and somehow still enjoyed it, please like the video and subscribe for more content of middling quality in the future, and I hope you found the video helpful.